The Vatican has opened its archives on the wartime papacy of Pius XII. They were kept secret for decades amid accusations that he turned a blind eye to the Holocaust.
They finally opened the Vatican's forbidden archive, and what they found inside shouldn't exist. A signed papal document proving the Catholic Church burned innocent men alive for heresy, while the Pope's own written absolution sat buried in a misfiled drawer for nearly 700 years. A 4th century Bible that is missing versus billions of Christians believe are the Word of God. Wartime memos so damning, the Vatican edited them out of its own published history and sealed the originals for 80 years. And now, an artificial intelligence is decoding pages no human has touched in 7 centuries. And it is pulling out secrets faster than the institution can contain them. 85 kilometers of shelving, 12 centuries of documents, millions of pages no living person has ever read, and a machine that reads everything. This is what was hiding beneath one of the most protected buildings on Earth. And by the end of this video, you will understand why they kept it locked. The misfiled parchment. Let's start with the document that rewrote 700 years of history. In September 2001, an Italian paleographer named Barbara Frail was conducting routine research when she pulled a document from a drawer where it did not belong. Dated August 1308, misfiled since at least 1628.
I'd done the first one about the Vatican Library, but there is a second part of that apostolate, and that is the Vatican Archives, the Apostolic Archives. They used to be called the Vatican Secret Archives.
373 years in the wrong place. Here's what she found, and why it matters more than almost anything else that has come out of the Vatican in the last 100 years. In 1307, King Philip IV of France arrested the Knights Templar. The Templars had built a financial and military empire across every kingdom in Europe. They owned property in every nation, constructed hundreds of castles, and essentially invented medieval international banking. They lent money to kings. They managed assets across borders. They were extraordinarily wealthy, and Philip wanted that wealth. He arrested thousands of knights on a single coordinated day, Friday the 13th of October, 1307, a date so catastrophic that some historians believe it is the origin of the Friday the 13th superstition. He had them tortured until they confessed to heresy, to spitting on the cross, to denouncing God. 54 were burned at the stake. In 1312, the entire order was dissolved by papal decree. In 1314, the last Grand Master Jacques de Molay was burned alive in Paris. He was said to have cursed both King Philip and Pope Clement from the flames.
So I saw letters that were written between Pope Pius IX and President Abraham Lincoln and the President of the Confederate States of America, President Jefferson Davis.
For 700 years, the official story was absolute. The Templars were heretics, condemned by the Church, destroyed by royal justice, case closed. The parchment Fraile pulled from that drawer tells a completely different story. It was the official record of a secret papal investigation at the Château de Chinon in France. Pope Clement V had sent 3 cardinals as personal envoys to interrogate the Templar leadership, including Grand Master de Molay himself. The interrogations lasted 4 days in August. 1308. The accused admitted to certain infractions, but insisted they had denied Christ in words only, not in spirit, and that any questionable practices during initiation were tests rather than true blasphemy. The cardinals concluded their investigation. Their finding was clear, not guilty. Pope Clement absolved them. He absolved Jacques de Molay and the rest of the Templar leadership of heresy. He reinstated them to communion with the Church. He signed it, sealed it. The Pope knew they were not heretics. He put it in writing. But King Philip had already decided to destroy the order and seize every asset. He threatened the papacy itself with military force. Clement was forced to abandon the Templars to their fate, and then the document was filed away. It disappeared into the archive for 693 years, while the Grand Master burned, and the Templar reputation was destroyed for generations. Now, here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. A Vatican official later confirmed that the Chinon parchment was perfectly described in a 1912 catalog. It was listed, cataloged, available to any qualified researcher who asked for it. For 89 years, from 1912 to 2001, nobody noticed. Nobody thought to look. In an archive of 85 kilometers of shelving, that is 53 miles, more shelf space than the distance from Rome to Naples, a document that exonerates the most famous military order in history sat in plain sight for nearly a century. Nobody picked it up. In 2007, the Vatican released the Chinon parchment publicly as part of a limited edition of 799 leather-bound copies. Using ultraviolet light, experts recovered nearly invisible margin notes believed to be in Pope Clement's own hand. 700 years of false narrative, overturned by a misfiled parchment. And get this, if one misfiled document rewrote 700 years of history, what else is sitting in the wrong drawer right now? That archive has 85 kilometers of shelving, 12 centuries of material, and most of it has never been read. But before we get to what a machine is now pulling out of those pages, you need to understand what this place actually is, and why one man nearly destroyed it all. The Buried City, the Vatican Apostolic Archive, known until 2019 as the Vatican Secret Archive, is the central repository for every act, letter, and document the Catholic Church has accumulated since the 8th century. 600 archival collections, trial transcripts of accused heretics, diplomatic correspondence between popes and emperors, confiscated libraries, artifacts seized during centuries of crusades, inquisitions, and political maneuvering. The handwritten transcript of the trial of Galileo Galilei is in there. A letter from Michelangelo complaining Vatican guards had not been paid. A plea from Mary, Queen of Scots, begging the Pope to intervene before her beheading. King Henry VIII's annulment request. Letters from Abraham Lincoln. A papal bull from 1493 dividing the entire Americas between Spain and Portugal. Every document the Church wanted to keep, and many it never wanted anyone to see. One scholar who studied the cataloging system described it as an extensive buried city, a Herculaneum inundated by the lava of time. That is not a metaphor. That is a professional assessment. In 1612, Pope Paul V sealed the archive as a private collection. The intent was explicit. This belongs to the Pope and the Pope alone. That rule held for 269 years. During those centuries, the collection absorbed every papal trial, every scandal, every dead pope's private library. It grew and grew, and nobody outside the Vatican walls could touch it. In 1881, Pope Leo XIII finally allowed researchers in. But allowed is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Scholars were vetted, monitored, and restricted to 3 folders per day. The Archives prefect, Archbishop Sergio Pagano, watched them on a live closed-circuit television feed for 27 years. No browsing, no copying, 3 folders. If they did not contain what you needed, you went home. If you care about buried history, subscribe now, because what comes next makes everything so far look like a warm-up. And even with those restrictions, the archive was so poorly cataloged that researchers routinely missed documents filed in wrong sections, in a system that had never recovered from the worst thing that ever happened to it. Because in 1810, Napoleon tried to steal the entire thing. Napoleon's heist. Here's the part nobody talks about. When Napoleon became emperor, he wanted a central archive of all European knowledge, with Paris as its capital. In 1809, he ordered the entire Vatican archive seized and shipped to France. By 1813, over 3,200 crates had been hauled across dirt roads, over the Mont Cenis mountain pass, and into the Hôtel de Soubise in Paris. More than 102,000 registers, volumes, and bundles arrived. The archive's chief archivist, Gaetano Marini, was forced to accompany the collection. When French officials noticed key documents were missing, Marini confessed he had hidden them before leaving Rome, including the 8th century Liber Diurnus, one of the oldest formularies of the papal chancery, and 78 gold-sealed bulls dating back to Emperor Frederick Barbarossa in 1164. Meanwhile, loyal Vatican staff buried records belonging to Pope Pius VII in the Vatican gardens before the French could find them. Those garden documents were not recovered for nearly 50 years. But here's the deal. When Napoleon fell in 1814, the French government ordered the archive returned to Rome, but provided almost no money for the transport. the Vatican had to pay for it themselves. And when the money ran out, Vatican officials did something that should make your stomach turn. They sold documents by weight. Parchments dating back centuries were bought by a Parisian grocer for wrapping paper. Fragments of papal correspondence were still turning up in Parisian shops at the end of the 19th century. Crates shipped by sea were contaminated by bilge water. Others were damaged in river crossings. Scholars estimate between 1/4 and 1/3 of everything Napoleon took never returned. Tens of thousands of documents. Centuries of history. Gone. And the documents that did come back arrived in complete chaos. The old system destroyed. A new French cataloging system left unfinished. The Galileo trial documents were actually stolen from the Paris archive by a French count, and only returned decades later by his widow. Now, pay attention to this next detail, because it tells you everything about the people who guard this place. When Napoleon's troops arrived to seize the archive, the chief archivist performed one act of defiance. He took a critical letter from 1530, rolled it up, and hid it inside a secret drawer in a chair in the archive's antechamber. The soldiers searched everything, packed over 3,000 crates, shipped the entire papal record to Paris. They never found that chair. Nearly 200 years later, Archbishop Pagano told journalists about it. The satisfaction in his voice was unmistakable. "The French never found it," he said. "These are people who will hide documents inside furniture before they will let outsiders have them." That is the institutional mentality guarding 12 centuries of secrets. And that is exactly why what happened in 2017 terrified them. The machine that reads everything. In 2017, a team from Roma Tre University in Italy launched a project called In Codis Ratio, Latin for the code system. Their goal was simple and unprecedented: teach a machine to read handwriting that had defeated human scholars for centuries. Here's the problem they were up against. The archive's documents span 12 centuries. Medieval Latin scribes used ligatures, fusing adjacent letters, abbreviations with no modern equivalent, and character forms so cramped and peculiar that even trained paleographers, the specialists who dedicate their careers to this, disagree on what the pages say. A single letter could look completely different from one document to the next. Standard optical character recognition, the technology that reads printed text in milliseconds, fails completely on this material. So, the team built a neural network trained on entire words, not individual letters. Using NVIDIA graphics processing units and Google's TensorFlow framework, they taught the system to recognize patterns human eyes struggle with. And here's the clever part. For training data, they recruited 120 students from 24 Italian high schools. These teenagers had zero knowledge of medieval Latin, none. They simply looked at character images and clicked whether they matched known letter forms. Image by image, click by click. Kids with no expertise in ancient languages taught a machine to read what scholars could not decipher at scale. The system started with the Vatican registers, over 18,000 pages of 13th century papal correspondence, letters between popes and kings, queens, and institutions across Europe, documents of unprecedented historical relevance that had never been transcribed in the more than 700 years since they were written. The researchers called them an unreleased corpus. 7 centuries of papal communication sitting unread. The AI achieved 65% exact word accuracy on its first pass. Not perfect, but enough to give paleographers a working foundation at massive scale. And the team has publicly stated their system is designed to handle the entire archive. All 85 kilometers, 12 centuries, millions of pages no living person has ever read. A machine that does not care about institutional reputation. That does not care about what is comfortable. That reads everything. But before the AI could reach the modern files, the Vatican did something nobody expected. They opened the one section everyone had been demanding to see. And what was inside was more explosive than anyone imagined. The wartime files. On March 2nd, 2020, 100 researchers walked through the doors to access the complete archive of Pope Pius XII, the wartime pontiff whose papacy lasted from 1939 to 1958. These documents covered the Vatican's actions during World War II, its knowledge of the Holocaust, its response to the Nazi extermination of 6 million Jews. Under normal policy, this material would have stayed sealed until 2028. Pope Francis broke protocol. "The Church is not afraid of history," he said. Inside were 16 million pages. Within weeks, German historian Hubert Wolff and his team from the University of Münster announced what they had found. Documents deliberately excluded from the Vatican's own official wartime publication. Between 1965 and 1981, the Vatican had published 11 volumes of Pius XII's papers, presented as the definitive record. Wolff's team proved it was selective. Documents had been left out because they were anti-Semitic and revealed why Pius did not speak out against the Holocaust. The Vatican had edited its own history before publishing it. Pulitzer Prize winner David Kurtzer was among the first inside. And what he found next? Pay close attention, because this is where the story stops being about dusty documents and starts being about human lives. October 16th, 1943, before dawn. A coordinated Nazi operation moves through the streets of Rome. Over 1,000 Roman Jews are rounded up. Men, women, children, families pulled from their homes in the dark. They are taken to a military college and held there, 800 yards from St. Peter's Basilica. 800 yards. Close enough that if you stood on the roof of the detention building, you could see the dome. The German ambassador reported directly to Hitler that the operation happened under the Pope's very windows. Then the captives were loaded onto trains. Destination, Auschwitz. 16 came back. Out of more than 1,000. 16. And in the newly opened archive, Kurtzer found the internal memos that explained why the Vatican stayed silent. He found a letter from Father Pietro Tacchi Venturi, the Pope's longtime emissary to Mussolini's regime. Tacchi Venturi urged Pius to make a private protest to the German ambassador, but here's the catch. His argument was not humanitarian, not even close. He recommended telling the ambassador there was no need for violence because Mussolini's racial laws were already sufficient to contain the Jewish minority. That was the best case for intervention that a senior Vatican diplomat could muster. Not moral outrage, not compassion, bureaucratic sufficiency. The Pope then consulted Monsignor Angelo Dell'Acqua. Dell'Acqua's response, preserved in his own handwriting, argued the Pope should not speak out at all. His reasoning: Jews have caused problems and threatened Christian societies. He cautioned against believing Jewish sources because, he wrote, Jews easily exaggerate. 2 memos, 2 senior advisors. One said, intervene with a bureaucratic argument. The other said, do nothing, and justified it with anti-Semitism. Pius said nothing publicly. The trains left Rome. But here's what makes this story impossible to reduce to a simple verdict. And this matters. At the same time those memos were being written, Vatican networks were saving Jewish lives on a massive scale. Researchers finding those damning documents also found evidence of something extraordinary happening simultaneously. Newly discovered records showed the Church hid over 4,200 Jews in 235 monasteries and convents across Rome. Pius himself sent his nephew Carlo Pacelli to arrange 550 placards declaring church properties exempt from Nazi search and confiscation. On the same day as the roundup, after learning of the arrests, the Pope's Secretary of State ordered the German ambassador to the Vatican for a direct conversation. A previously unknown list cataloged 3,200 rescued Jews by name. 80% of Roman Jews survived the Holocaust. That is higher than in any other city where the SS conducted mass roundups. Let that sit for a moment. Anti-Semitic memos at the highest levels arguing against public intervention? A massive clandestine rescue operation, saving thousands. Both documented, both real, both happening at the same time. Both sealed for 80 years. And the Vatican's own 11-volume published record told only the story it chose to tell. The version of the Bible that shouldn't exist. And then there is the Codex Vaticanus, a 4th century manuscript written around 300 to 330 of the Common Era in Greek, uncial script. All capital letters, no spaces, no punctuation, 733 folios containing nearly the complete Old and New Testaments. One of the 2 oldest near-complete Bibles in existence, inside the Vatican since at least 1475. For 550 years, they essentially locked it away. The textual critic Tischendorf was granted only a few hours with it and barely allowed to study it. Here's why that matters. Modern scholarship has confirmed the Codex Vaticanus is one of the earliest and least modified versions of the biblical text in existence. The last 12 verses of the Gospel of Mark, the ones in every modern Bible, are absent. Other passages that generations of Christians have read as scripture do not appear at all. The Codex preserves a snapshot of the Bible before centuries of standardizing changes occurred, a photograph of Christianity's foundational text, taken closer to the source than almost any other surviving document. Restricted from scholarship for over 5 centuries. What's still sealed now? Step back and look at the full picture, because the pattern is impossible to ignore. 1612, the archive is sealed. 1881, researchers allowed in under heavy restrictions. 1912, the Chinon parchment is catalogued. Nobody finds it for 89 years. 2001, Frale discovers it. 700 years of false narrative overturned. 2017, I begins decoding pages unread since the 13th century. 2020, 16 million wartime pages opened. Within weeks, researchers find documents the Vatican deliberately excluded from its own record. Discovery, restriction, disclosure, decades or centuries later, always on the institution's timeline. And here is the number that should keep you up at night. The archive currently allows access only up to October 1958. Everything after that, sealed. The pontificates of John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, John Paul I, who died 33 days after becoming Pope. Under circumstances, historians still debate. John Paul II, whose nearly 27-year papacy included the fall of the Soviet Union and the first public revelations of the church abuse crisis. Benedict XVI, the first pope to resign in 600 years, all sealed. The Cold War, the Second Vatican Council that transformed Catholic practice worldwide. The Vatican bank scandal of the 1980s. The death of Roberto Calvi, found hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge in London with bricks in his pockets. Decades of internal investigations into financial corruption. The global abuse crisis and every internal document the institution produced in response, all filed, all sealed. Under Vatican precedent, those files could stay locked for 70 years after each pontificate ends. John Paul II's papacy ended in 2005. Those documents might not be available until 2075. An entire generation could pass before the archive reveals what the Church knew, decided, and concealed during the most turbulent decades in its modern history. And the AI is just getting started. 65% accuracy on 18,000 pages from a single century. 85 kilometers left to go. It does not care about reputation. It reads everything, page by page, word by word. Every time that archive opens, what comes out changes what we thought we knew. The Chinon parchment rewrote the Templars. The Pius XII files proved the Vatican edited its own history. The Codex Vaticanus holds a Bible that does not match what billions read today. So, here's my question for the comments. And I actually want to hear your answer. When those post-1958 files finally open, what do you think is going to come out? The Vatican bank documents? The abuse crisis files? Something nobody has even thought to look for yet? Drop your prediction below. Subscribe if you haven't, and turn on notifications. Because this archive is still opening, and when the next revelation drops, you will hear about it here first.